Well, the president has been very, very busy tweeting, and not just on OPEC. For example, on Nancy Pelosi, he has been sending out some very terse missives saying that, again, her damning the tax cuts is going to ultimately hurt her and Democrats. You wouldn't know that given some of the early fundraising numbers we have and the excitement around the Democratic Party about the midterm. But maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves. They're getting ahead of themselves. Let's go to Deidre Bolton, GOP pollster, Chris Wilson, and last but certainly not least, Connell McShane, who was warding off crocodiles last time we saw him at Mar-a-Lago.
Someone asked him.
You're all right. Everything's all right.
I made it, yeah.
I'm very good. I was worried. The concern out there is that the president has to play this role of boosting spirits, do a Vince Lombardi thing, get people into this election when there's such pessimism for Republicans.
And also that he's not on the ballot. I mean, that's the one thing I saw in covering Pennsylvania 18 there for a few days, at least before and during that election, is that Rick Saccone was running as the Republican, remember, in that district. And nobody could be more of a kind of a Trump impersonator, for lack of a better term. I mean, he was literally saying, I was Trump before Trump. And he lost that election in a district that the president won by 20 points. So I think if the president himself, just in talking to people there, and I think this is true in other districts around the country, I'm not sure, but I think it is, if the president himself was on the ballot, he probably would have won again. And people were still happy with him, those who had supported him, and still fairly enthusiastic about him. But it wasn't him. It was somebody else that they had to support.
That's a good point. That was the Obama phenomenon, right? When he wasn't on the ballot, Democrats were losing in the midterm, both of his midterms. But what do you make of that? How worried when you go out and talk to Republicans? What are they telling you?
Well, it depends on the area. But Connell's example of Pennsylvania is a perfect one because it illustrates the challenge that Republicans have in all the other districts. Rick Saccone was outraised by Conor Lamb by 500% in 2018. There is very few candidates that can compete when they are being outraised by 500%. In Alabama, the Republican nominee was outraised by 325%. So you've got a pattern that is developing.
What's all this money your Republicans have?
There's a couple of reasons for it. One is I think the Democrats have technological advantages that are built in. The second reason is...
Well, what are the technological?
Well, there's just, going back to Obama 2008, they were able to consolidate the way in which they do fundraising operations, in which they have over 300 million credit cards that if you get a Democrat fundraising email, you click on a box and you've given. Whereas if you get a Republican fundraising email, it takes 3 or 4 pages before you actually... And
you have to guys up on the internet? Maybe
we're hoping that maybe by next year, maybe right after the election, it should work out. But I think there are areas in which Republicans have caught up. The fundraising just happens to be an area in which we lag behind. But there's also a lot of built-in advantages that exist to someone who's been in politics their whole life. Yeah. And you take someone who was on Fox earlier today, Dave Brad, who just got elected as a college professor. He didn't get elected to the state house at 21 and state senate at 28. And so he doesn't have that sort of history of building up a donor base.
Polls are close for him.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah,
it's a
and he was
seat.
the rebel candidate at the time when he took down Eric Cannon.
Yeah.
Deidre, much is made of the fact that everyone seems to think that these 40 Republicans or whatever they are that are retiring or leaving, they're getting out of Dodge now, and that this blue wave is going to be real, and they just want out before it is real. What do you make of that?
So it does seem 40 incumbents, right, outraised by at least one Democratic challenger. But I also think, at least for the primaries, there are more Democratic challengers, plural. So I think in some case there is a divide and conquer, or at least divide and be distracted hope. But of course, then when somebody does emerge from the primaries, presumably that Democratic candidate then takes advantage of all those small bits of money that are easier to trace. But I still think the Republicans tend to have more of an advantage when it comes to the PACs or the super PACs as opposed to the Democratic candidates. At least from what I've been following just on local levels, it seems to be those small donations that really are giving the Democrats
But what
an
about
advantage.
these narrowing gaps you see between, do you prefer a Democrat or Republican Congress? Right. And that's narrowed to the mid to high single digits from double digits. What are we to make of that?
5 or 6 points now, right?
Right.
I mean, I think you made this point a few times that sometimes we get ahead of ourselves and assume that something's going to be one way in March or April and it's different by November. But I don't think there's any doubt that the Republicans that are getting out of Congress now, for the most part, maybe with a few exceptions, are doing so because they think they're going to lose in the fall. I mean, that the party has changed, that the party is not what it was with them, or that the midterms are just not kind to Republicans. Now, they could be wrong, and wouldn't it be ironic to say that
they are pointing fingers at each other. I did notice this when I was in Washington this week, Chris, where A lot of House Republicans were blaming the Senate Republicans were blaming Mitch McConnell. He then going after the president, saying you feigned surprise. I'm not saying he doesn't use the word feign, but at this $1.3 trillion spending measure, you and your people knew what was in it. So there's a little bit of pre-agitating going on.
There is. I think a lot of things in that. Number one, on the polling side, yes, it has started to close the generic ballot, but the intensity advantage for the Democrats still exists. Those people who are excited
they're
about
more
the election,
inclined to run out to the polls.
Much like to your point earlier that Republicans were when Obama was president.
Right.
The second aspect of this is I do think Republicans have issues to run on. If we begin to start shooting arrows at each other over the fact that something wasn't done, we lose the opportunity to talk about the things that have been done. And specifically with regard to tax cuts, that is something Republicans can achieve on, they can succeed on.
And Senator Orrin Hatch, right, he had the best creative, like on tax day, right, when you were in D.C., he released that video of him shredding the tax code page by page to that, no, goodbye. You're not going to make me sing the whole thing.
I don't know if that's a winner for him. I'm just taking a leap here, but I knew what he was trying to do. All right, guys, I want to thank you all very, very much.